Clara stared at the invitation on the kitchen counter, her fingers tracing the elegant script as though it could tell her what the night would hold. She had always loved parties, not for the music or the food, but for the feeling of stepping into a world that was slightly different from her ordinary days, a world where people laughed a little louder, where lights twinkled in ways that made her heart flutter, and where she could feel life pulsing around her, reminding her of possibilities she sometimes forgot existed. But this party was different. It was David's colleagues' annual gathering, the one that everyone in his office had been talking about for months, the one Clara had politely listened to him mention again and again, nodding and smiling, pretending that she didn't feel a nervous twinge at the thought of mingling with people she barely knew while her husband moved through the crowd with ease. She adjusted the hem of her dress for the third time, wondering if it was the right shade, the right fit, the right way to signal that she belonged but also wasn't trying too hard, and she wondered if David even noticed these small details about her, if he remembered the little things that made her feel seen. He was in the living room, checking his reflection in the mirror, his tie slightly crooked, a smirk playing on his lips, and she watched him with a mixture of admiration and something else, something she couldn't name yet. He looked handsome, more relaxed than usual, his shoulders looser, his eyes brighter, and for a moment, Clara felt a pang of longing that surprised her, longing not just for his attention, but for the spark they used to share, for the excitement that seemed to have dimmed in their everyday routine. She took a deep breath, smoothing her hair one last time, and tried to steady the butterflies in her stomach, the nervous energy that always seemed to accompany social events, especially those where she would be watching David, observing him in a new light, hoping to catch glimpses of the man she fell in love with, hoping he hadn't changed too much, hoping she could still find the man who had once held her hand with such warmth that she felt as though the world itself had paused. When they arrived, the street outside the venue was buzzing with cars and laughter spilling from open doors, and Clara felt a flicker of anticipation mixed with trepidation. She hoped this party would be fun, but she also feared the unknown, the unpredictability of seeing her husband interact with colleagues and friends in a world she didn't fully understand. The room was alive with soft music and the gentle glow of decorative lights, the air thick with perfume, the faint aroma of wine, and the warmth of a crowd that seemed to have its own rhythm. Clara's eyes scanned the room, taking in couples laughing together, friends catching up with animated gestures, the polite clinking of glasses, the chatter of conversations that seemed both familiar and distant, and she felt a curious mixture of comfort and isolation, the strange sensation of being surrounded yet apart, of watching life happen around her while she tried to find her own place within it. David moved ahead, his presence commanding without effort, his laughter mingling naturally with the conversations around him, and Clara noticed something that both thrilled and unsettled her. He seemed lighter, almost playful, a side she hadn't seen in months, perhaps years, a side that made her heart skip a beat and her mind race with questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. She followed him slowly, letting him lead the way, absorbing the music, the voices, the soft energy of the evening, trying to keep a calm expression on her face while her thoughts spun with curiosity and unease. When he caught sight of her from across the room, his eyes sparkled in a way that made her stomach flutter. It was the same spark from the early days of their relationship, the one that had drawn her to him, that had made her feel cherished and desired, and she wondered if he had noticed the effect he still had on her. Yet even as she felt that warmth, a shadow of doubt crept in, a tiny whisper that questioned what else this night might reveal, the secrets or longings that had been tucked away under layers of routine and comfort, hidden beneath the familiarity of years spent together. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay present, to enjoy the night without letting fear or imagination run wild, but the moment she stepped further into the room, the energy shifted slightly. She saw David talking to a woman she didn't recognize, laughing in a way that seemed more intimate than casual, and her chest tightened with a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and a quiet, undeniable ache. She told herself it was nothing, that people were just friendly, that her mind was overthinking, but the feeling lingered, subtle yet persistent, like a soft vibration that she couldn't ignore. She wandered closer to the refreshments table, pouring herself a glass of sparkling juice, the bubbles rising quickly, tickling her fingers as she held the flute, and she realized how much she had missed feeling nervous about something. The kind of nervousness that wasn't fear, but excitement, anticipation, and the thrill of uncertainty. As she sipped, she overheard snippets of conversation, laughter spilling from corners of the room, compliments exchanged, jokes made at a pace that seemed dizzying, and she felt herself drawn into the rhythm, yet still acutely aware of David's presence in her peripheral vision, watching him, observing his gestures, the way he leaned in when someone spoke, the way his smile lit up his face, the way his hands moved as he gestured. Small movements she remembered from the early days of their courtship. Her heart beat faster with each interaction she noticed, a strange mixture of pride, longing, and unease coursing through her veins, and she wondered if he felt the same tension, the same mixture of excitement and nostalgia, the same pull of attraction that she felt. The night moved forward, songs shifting, laughter swelling, conversations weaving a tapestry of human connection, and Clara found herself drifting closer to David, wanting to share in the energy, to feel united in the experience, yet also holding back, afraid that the evening might reveal something she wasn't prepared to see. When he finally turned toward her, catching her gaze with that familiar spark, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny flame that whispered that perhaps this night would be magical, that perhaps they could find each other again amidst the music and lights, amidst the whispers and laughter, that the man she married could still be the man who made her heart race, who reminded her of love's power, who could make a simple glance feel like an entire conversation. And just as she moved to meet him halfway across the room, a sudden interruption, a friend calling his name, a laugh from across the hall, a gesture she couldn't quite interpret, made her pause, her mind racing with questions, her heart both heavy and light, her imagination alive with possibilities she couldn't yet name, and she realized that this night, the party that seemed ordinary at first glance, would change everything in ways she had not expected, setting the stage for revelations, emotions, and discoveries that would test their marriage, their trust, and the fragile, beautiful connection that had brought them together all those years ago. The music shifted, a slower melody filling the room, and Clara felt a subtle tension ripple through her as she watched David move effortlessly among his colleagues, laughing with ease, gesturing with his hands, his voice carrying across the crowd like a thread pulling her attention in every direction, and she couldn't help but notice how different he seemed tonight, more alive, more playful, almost as if the party itself had unlocked a side of him she hadn't seen in months, perhaps years, and the sight made her chest tighten with an unexpected mixture of pride, admiration, and a faint, uneasy curiosity. She had always known David to be charming, attentive, loving in quiet ways that didn't always announce themselves, but tonight he was radiant, magnetic, drawing smiles and glances from people around him, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a tiny flicker of envy, a whisper of insecurity, because the man she had known for so long seemed to belong to this world with a confidence she couldn't fully share, and her mind raced with questions she didn't dare speak aloud, wondering if he had grown bored with the ordinary, the familiar, the steady rhythm of their life together, or if this glow was just a spark of temporary excitement, a fleeting energy that would fade as quickly as it had appeared. She sipped her drink slowly, letting the bubbles tickle her fingers, and forced herself to breathe, telling herself to observe, to enjoy the scene without letting imagination twist innocent gestures into something more, yet her heart thumped with a strange intensity, a mixture of longing and worry, because she noticed how his laughter lingered with certain people, how his eyes briefly met those of a colleague she didn't know well, a woman with a warm smile, someone who seemed to hold David's attention just a little longer than Clara had expected, and she wondered if she was imagining it, if her mind was filling in gaps that didn't exist, yet the feeling refused to go away, fluttering in her chest like a bird trapped inside her ribs, reminding her of vulnerability, of desire, of a need to be seen, appreciated, remembered, and she felt herself leaning slightly closer to him as he passed, hoping he might notice her presence, hoping that in his moment of charm, in his sparkling eyes and carefree grin, he might still see the woman who had loved him for years, who had waited through quiet mornings and late nights, who had held the home together, who had held him in her heart even when the world seemed to pull him in all directions. But then he glanced away, a subtle movement, barely perceptible to anyone else, yet Clara felt it like a jolt of electricity, a spark of unease, and she realized that this night, which had promised warmth and fun, also carried an element of unpredictability, a fragile tension that could grow with every passing moment, every glance, every word exchanged across the room. She wandered slowly to the edge of the dance floor, letting her eyes roam over the crowd, noting the couples swaying gently, the laughter rising and falling, the clinking of glasses, the soft sparkle of lights reflecting off faces, and she felt herself caught between two worlds. One, the secure, familiar love she shared with David, grounded in years of memories and shared moments. The other, the intoxicating allure of the unknown, the realization that people change, that sparks ignite unexpectedly, and that the heart can sometimes feel things that reason struggles to explain. She watched as David moved toward a small group, leaning in, nodding, listening with such focused attention that Clara almost forgot to breathe, almost forgot that he was her husband, because in that moment he seemed like a man from another life, someone who existed fully in this moment, in this social dance, in a world that was vibrant and alive, while she lingered on the outskirts, observing, longing, analyzing every flicker of emotion that crossed his face. A small laugh escaped him, one that she hadn't heard in months, and her chest tightened with a pang of both joy and uncertainty, because she realized how much she had missed seeing him like this, how much she had craved these small, bright moments that reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him, and yet, in the same heartbeat, she felt a twist of apprehension, because something about the way he looked at the woman he spoke with, a glance lingering too long, a tilt of the head, a softness in his eyes, made her pulse quicken with questions she didn't yet have answers to. She told herself to breathe again, to steady her heart, to remind herself that she was imagining things, that people were friendly, that conversations could be innocent, yet the sensation refused to leave her, like a quiet whisper brushing against her consciousness, reminding her that love was never simple, that emotions were messy, and that even the strongest bonds could be tested by a night full of laughter, music, and unexpected charm. Clara moved closer to David, keeping a polite distance, hoping to catch his attention without interrupting, feeling a strange mix of longing and pride, wanting to be near him, wanting to see him happy, yet terrified of what she might find in the depth of his gaze or the subtle shift in his demeanor, the possibility that he might feel things she hadn't anticipated, desires or attractions that didn't include her, or perhaps a reminder of a youth, a freedom, a spark she had assumed was long gone. And as she observed him, her mind wandered back to the early days of their relationship, the flirtatious touches, the long conversations, the stolen moments of joy, and she felt a bittersweet ache in her chest, a reminder that time changes people, that love grows and shifts, and that the heart must navigate these tides with courage and honesty. As the evening progressed, Clara noticed small details that both captivated and unsettled her, the way David's hand lingered on a shoulder, the subtle lean when he listened, the animated gestures that drew attention, the sparkle in his eyes when someone made him laugh, all of it a reminder that he was still vibrant, still full of life, and still capable of stirring emotions she thought had quieted in the routine of daily life. She felt both thrilled and anxious, a duality that made the room feel both exhilarating and slightly dangerous, as though the night itself held secrets, small revelations that could shift her understanding of him, of their marriage, and of the delicate balance between trust and curiosity. Clara's thoughts raced, weaving between past and present, blending memories of love with the reality of what she saw tonight, and she realized that she had to confront her emotions, to recognize the vulnerability in her heart, to embrace the excitement and the fear simultaneously, because this night was not just a gathering of colleagues, it was a reflection, a mirror showing her what she had loved, what she feared, and what she longed for, a tapestry of emotion that reminded her that marriage, like life, was unpredictable, and that beauty often hid behind subtle, fleeting moments. When David finally glanced toward her, his eyes meeting hers across the crowd, a shiver ran down her spine, a mixture of relief and anticipation, because in that single glance, there was recognition, there was connection, there was a spark of the intimacy that had always existed between them, yet she couldn't ignore the flicker of distraction, the trace of longing elsewhere, the subtle complexity that made her heart ache with questions she wasn't ready to answer. And as she took a step toward him, ready to engage, ready to share a smile, ready to reconnect, the music shifted, laughter swelled from a nearby group, someone called his name, and David's attention drifted for a moment, leaving Clara suspended in a swirl of emotion, between joy and doubt, between love and uncertainty, between the comfort of the past and the thrill of the present, and she realized that this night would challenge her understanding of intimacy, desire, and connection, that the evening's unfolding drama, subtle and gentle, would test the resilience of her heart, and that the answers to her questions would emerge slowly, in fleeting glances, soft touches, whispered words, and the quiet, powerful language of a love that refused to remain static, a love that demanded attention, courage, and an open heart in the face of the unexpected. The lights dimmed slightly as the music softened, and a slow, gentle rhythm spread through the room, wrapping everyone in a calm that felt almost intimate, and Clara sensed the shift before she fully understood it, her heart reacting faster than her thoughts as she saw couples drift closer, hands finding waists, shoulders leaning together, the party changing its mood from lively chatter to something warmer and more personal, and in that moment she felt both exposed and hopeful, because this was the kind of music that once belonged to her and David, the kind that carried memories of quiet evenings, shared smiles, and promises whispered without words, and as she stood there, unsure whether to move or wait, she noticed David turning toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable yet gentle, and when he stopped in front of her and held out his hand, the world around them seemed to pause just enough for her to hear her own heartbeat, fast and loud, echoing her confusion and longing all at once. She hesitated for a brief second, not because she didn't want to dance, but because she was afraid of what the dance might reveal, afraid that closeness would either heal something fragile between them or expose cracks she wasn't ready to face, yet she placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar warmth of his skin, and as they moved onto the dance floor, the noise of the room faded into a soft blur, replaced by the gentle sway of bodies and the steady rhythm guiding their steps. David's hand rested lightly on her back, respectful yet reassuring, and Clara felt a rush of comfort mixed with a sharp awareness, because this simple touch carried years of shared history, of laughter, arguments, quiet mornings, and unspoken understanding, and as they swayed together, she searched his face, trying to read his thoughts, trying to understand the emotions flickering behind his eyes, but his expression was calm, focused, almost thoughtful, and it made her wonder what was going on inside him, what memories or desires this night had stirred. The music wrapped around them, slow and steady, and Clara felt herself relax slightly, leaning into the rhythm, allowing the moment to unfold without forcing meaning onto it, and for a few precious seconds, it felt like they were alone, as if the party had dissolved into nothing more than soft light and shared breath, and she felt a wave of affection rise within her, reminding her why she had chosen him, why she had stayed through routine and repetition, through moments of distance and quiet misunderstanding. Yet even as warmth spread through her chest, she noticed a subtle change, a fleeting distraction in David's gaze, a moment where his eyes drifted past her shoulder, and her heart tightened, because she followed his glance and saw the same woman from earlier standing nearby, watching the dance floor with a gentle smile, and the realization struck Clara with quiet force, not like a sharp blow but like a slow ache, because it wasn't anger she felt, nor betrayal, but awareness, the understanding that attraction could exist without intention, that emotions could stir without action, and that this realization didn't erase love but complicated it. She tightened her hold just slightly, grounding herself in the moment, and David seemed to notice, his attention returning fully to her, his hand pressing a bit more firmly against her back, as if to reassure her, as if to say without words that she was still there, still chosen, still important, and that small gesture calmed her, even as questions lingered in her mind like unfinished sentences. They moved together through the rest of the song, steps unpracticed yet familiar, and Clara felt memories rise up uninvited, images of earlier days when dancing had been effortless, when every touch felt electric, when the future seemed wide and full of promise, and she wondered when that ease had faded, when comfort had quietly replaced excitement, and whether this night was a reminder or a warning, a gentle push to rediscover what they had or a signal that something needed attention before it slipped too far away. As the song ended, applause rippled softly through the room, and David smiled at her, a genuine, tender smile that eased some of the tension coiled in her chest, and for a moment, she believed that everything would be fine, that this dance had been a bridge back to each other, a simple act that spoke louder than words, yet as they stepped off the dance floor, the room's energy shifted again, voices growing louder, laughter returning, and Clara felt the protective bubble around them dissolve, leaving her exposed to the same currents of uncertainty that had followed her all evening. David excused himself briefly, pulled away by a colleague eager to talk, and Clara found herself standing alone once more, watching him from a distance, her emotions swirling with renewed intensity, because now that she had felt his closeness again, the distance felt sharper, more noticeable, and she realized how much she craved connection, not just physical closeness, but emotional presence, the kind that reassured without needing explanation. She leaned against a nearby table, her fingers tracing the edge absent-mindedly as she watched the crowd, her mind replaying the dance in fragments, the warmth of his hand, the fleeting distraction in his eyes, the way he had pulled her closer, and she struggled to make sense of it all, to decide whether she should feel comforted or unsettled, grateful or afraid, and she understood that both feelings could exist at once, that love was not a single emotion but a collection of moments, each carrying its own weight. As the party continued, Clara noticed how David's behavior seemed more restrained than earlier, his laughter softer, his movements less animated, as if the dance had grounded him, brought him back to himself, and this observation filled her with cautious hope, because it suggested awareness, a recognition of boundaries, an understanding of what truly mattered, yet she couldn't ignore the lingering presence of the woman from earlier, the quiet reminder that attraction could spark unexpectedly. And that trust required honesty, not denial. Time passed quickly, the hours slipping by unnoticed as the night deepened, and Clara felt a growing urge to talk to David, not confrontationally, but openly, to share her feelings before they hardened into resentment or fear, yet she hesitated, unsure of the right moment, unsure of how to put words to emotions that felt delicate and complex, and she decided to wait, to observe, to let the night reveal what it needed to reveal. When David finally returned to her side, his expression thoughtful, his voice gentle as he asked if she was enjoying herself, she smiled and nodded, choosing honesty in tone even if words failed her, and in that quiet exchange, she sensed that he too was reflecting, processing the night in his own way, and this shared introspection created a subtle bond between them, a silent agreement that something meaningful was unfolding. They stood together, watching the party wind down, guests beginning to gather their belongings, conversations growing quieter, and Clara felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity, because the emotional intensity of the evening had stripped away distractions, leaving her face to face with truths she couldn't ignore, that love required attention, that attraction did not automatically mean betrayal, and that marriage was a living thing that needed care, communication, and courage to grow. As they prepared to leave, Clara glanced once more around the room, at the lights now dimmer, the laughter softer, the energy settling into calm, and she realized that this night, which had begun with anticipation and unease, had become a turning point, not because of something dramatic or scandalous, but because it had forced her to see her relationship clearly, to acknowledge both its strength and its vulnerability, and as she walked beside David toward the door, her hand brushing against his, she felt a quiet determination rise within her, a resolve to face whatever came next with honesty and grace, even as questions lingered, even as emotions remained unresolved, because she understood now that the most important conversations were still ahead, waiting beyond the party lights, waiting in the quiet space where truth and love would finally meet. The cool night air greeted Clara as she stepped outside with David, the noise of the party fading behind them like a memory already slipping into the past, and for a moment they walked in silence, side by side, the sound of their footsteps filling the space between them, a space that felt heavier now that the lights and music were gone, because without the distractions, the emotions of the evening pressed closer, demanding attention, and Clara felt her heart beating fast, not from fear, but from the weight of unspoken thoughts that had followed her all night. David opened the car door for her, a small familiar gesture that stirred something tender in her chest, and as she settled into her seat, she watched him carefully, noticing the thoughtful set of his jaw, the quiet seriousness in his eyes, and she sensed that he too was carrying the night with him, turning it over in his mind, unsure where to begin. As they drove, the city lights blurred past the windows, casting soft reflections across the dashboard, and the silence grew thicker, no longer comfortable but not hostile either, just full of meaning, full of questions waiting for words, and finally, David spoke, his voice low and calm, admitting that the party had stirred something in him, not a desire to escape, not a wish to hurt her, but a feeling of restlessness he hadn't known how to name until now, a reminder of how alive he used to feel, how easily joy and excitement once came to him, and Clara listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap, her emotions shifting with every word, because his honesty surprised her, not with pain, but with relief. She realized then that what had unsettled her most was not his charm, not the glances or laughter, but the fear of distance, the fear of drifting apart without noticing. And as David continued, explaining that seeing her on the dance floor, feeling her hand in his, had grounded him, had reminded him of what truly mattered, Clara felt a quiet warmth spread through her, mixed with the lingering ache of vulnerability. She told him how she had felt, how watching him that night had stirred pride and longing at the same time, how it had also awakened her fears, not because she didn't trust him, but because she missed him, missed the closeness they once shared, the easy connection that had slowly been buried under routine and responsibility. And speaking these truths out loud felt like opening a window after a long winter, letting fresh air rush in, sharp but cleansing. The car slowed near a quiet street, and David pulled over, turning to face her fully, his expression open, unguarded, and in that moment, Clara saw not the confident man from the party, but the partner who had shared years of life with her, who carried doubts and hopes just like she did. And he reached for her hand, holding it firmly, not possessively, but with intention, as if anchoring himself to the present. He told her he never wanted to take her love for granted, that the night had reminded him how fragile connection could be if left unattended, and that scared him more than any passing feeling ever could. And Clara felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the deep release that comes when truth is finally spoken. They sat there for a long moment, the city quiet around them, the world narrowed to the space inside the car, and Clara realized that the party had not been a threat to their marriage, but a mirror, showing them both what needed care, what needed attention, what still existed beneath the surface waiting to be rediscovered. When they finally drove home, the tension between them had softened, replaced by a gentle awareness, a shared understanding that something important had shifted, and as they stepped into their quiet house, the familiar walls seemed to hold their history, every room echoing with memories of laughter, disagreement, comfort, and growth. Clara slipped off her shoes, feeling the grounding comfort of home beneath her feet, and David followed, setting his keys down. With care, as if the night required a gentler touch, and they moved through the house together, not rushed, not distant, simply present. In the living room, they sat close, the silence no longer heavy but thoughtful, and Clara leaned her head against David's shoulder, feeling his breath steady, his body warm and real, and she understood that love was not proven in perfect moments, but in the willingness to face uncomfortable truths together, to choose honesty over fear, connection over avoidance. David rested his cheek against her hair, and in that simple gesture, she felt reassurance stronger than any promise, because it carried the quiet decision to stay, to try, to grow. As the night deepened, Clara reflected on how easily she had assumed love was something that either stayed strong on its own or quietly faded, and she realized now that it was neither, that love required attention, courage, and the humility to admit when something needed care, and this realization did not frighten her, but strengthened her, because it meant their story was not fixed, not finished, but still unfolding. Before they went to bed, David paused, looking at her with a seriousness softened by affection, and thanked her for listening, for trusting him enough to share her fears, and Clara smiled, knowing that trust was not about never feeling uncertain, but about choosing openness when uncertainty appeared. As they turned off the lights and settled into the quiet of the night, Clara felt a sense of calm she hadn't expected, a calm rooted not in certainty, but in connection, and she understood that the party, with all its lights and music, had simply been the beginning, a moment that nudged them back toward each other, reminding them that love, when nurtured with honesty and care, could deepen rather than fade. And as she drifted toward sleep, Clara held on to the truth that had emerged from the night, that sometimes it is not the unexpected behavior that breaks a relationship, but the silence that follows it, and that by choosing to speak, to listen, and to stay present, she and David had taken a step not backward into the past, but forward into a more aware, more honest version of their love, one that could withstand uncertainty and still choose each other, even after a night that changed how she saw him, how she saw herself, and how she understood what it truly meant to share a life with someone.